Well, hello and welcome, everyone. It is my pleasure this afternoon to have this conversation with Dr. Gena Cox, author of Leading Inclusion. Gena, welcome.
Oh, it's so exciting to be here with you, Brenda. And, it's a particular pleasure because both of us have been on this author journey in 2022. And it's been fun to watch your book come out and now to have the same experience myself.
Yes, yes, we have definitely been able to share our experiences and exchange notes, and it's been very exciting to watch it all play out. So, thank you. So, as we've talked about many times, we have addressed some very significant issues from slightly different perspectives, and I've just been so excited about the intersection of our two works. But today, I really would like to dive deeper a little bit into some of the things that you have brought to the forefront in leading inclusion. So I've heard this, but for the benefit of our listeners, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about why you decided to write the book.
Well, there are a variety of reasons. I suppose that I'll shorthand it by saying that, I spent my entire career in corporate America, either as an employee or as an advisor to leaders in corporate America. And one of the things that I knew for a very long time was that often those leaders were not getting the unvarnished truth about the experience of their employees. And specifically when it came to the whole idea of what people call diversity and inclusion, I'm pretty confident that there were many executives who weren't really hearing the full story about what employees from traditionally subordinated groups experience in their workplaces. So I was really interested in providing, sort of a blueprint, a manifesto to help leaders think about that issue from a new perspective. But the other piece of it was that what really pushed me to do it when I did it was frankly the spring of 2020, where first of all, Ahmaud Arbery was killed. Then Taylor was killed, who I keep saying, she could have been my daughter. Then by the time George Floyd was killed, I was a basket case. And I was like, Gena, you have to do something. So the book is for leaders, but it is really also for people who look like me or who are from or in any way have felt the sting of exclusion, to help leaders understand what they can do so that we can all thrive.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for recounting that in my case and for sharing that with everyone else who's listening in. Because when we had our initial conversation, I felt that the sentiment that you shared was almost a playback of what I was feeling in the spring of 2020, which is why
Mhm.
this is also interesting to me. And so when you speak about, who you wrote the book for, it's really compelling to me that you are taking this basically bold step toward organizational leadership and institutional leadership. And one of the things that really stood out for me in your book is this acronym that you've created around REDI, REDI. Would you mind speaking about that?
Mhm. Well, first of all, let me say it's not so much that it's a bold step as it's a step that I think hasn't really been taken in this way because, Toni Morrison said if there's a story that needs to be told and you feel like it hasn't been told, then maybe you need to write it yourself. And so that was what I was trying to do. But specifically about the READY acronym, which stands for respect, E for equity, D for diversity, and I for inclusion. And you got to have an acronym, right? But in all seriousness, the reason it starts with the R, which I call a respect first model, is because I had done some research in preparation for the book. I had spoken to over 30 executive leaders who were very kind, very generous, very with their time, and very honest with me. And I'll tell you what they said. And I had also done a survey of working women, and then including in that 500 or so people who did that survey were 149 Black women. And what I had known, again, I think just from my own personal experiences, but what was confirmed from these two pieces of research was that one, the executives, what they said to me was I said, I asked them what gets in the way of you leading the conversation about inclusion in your organization. And the first thing they said was, frankly, you know, we're not sure that this belongs on our plate. We're not quite sure that this is something that we should be focused on. That was the first thing. That was not a surprise to me, but that's what they said. They were honest. The second thing they said was, people who advise us, people in our peer group, some of them say, you know what? Why don't you just back off from this issue and kind of wait and see how it all plays out?
Mm.
Because you're darned if you do and darned if you don't. If you do something that people don't like, you get criticized. If you do nothing, you get criticized. So maybe you ought to just not do much of anything and wait and see how this all plays out. And then the third thing that they said to me was, frankly, we are not even sure what the people who would benefit from this or who are meant to benefit from this, people of color, people who are LGBTQ plus, people who are women, all the variations. We're not sure exactly what they want from us. So they were honest, and this is what they said was holding them back. But then the women, especially the Black women in this survey, what they said was, oh, we know that. That's nothing new. And the reason we know that is because we see it in the behavior of our leaders. Instead of approaching us and getting to know us and understand what we need, they avoid us, they back away. And what they were also saying to me is that we interpret that backing away as disrespect.
Mm.
And that was an epiphany for me, Brenda, because I realized that in that moment, it was clear to me that for all of the people that I talk to who look like me or who, as I said before, come from traditionally, subordinated groups, when you ask them what they want, that's the first word they utter. They
Yeah.
say respect.
Yeah.
They don't say belonging and any other words that they don't understand. They say, I just want you to respect me. That's it.
Right.
And
Right.
so that was the foundation for me saying, we've got to get back to just focusing on respect. And what does respect really look like? What does that really mean? It means I want to be seen, I want to be heard, and I want to be valued. And really made this core to the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm reflecting on your comments, and when I ask similar questions with organizational clients, have you spoken to this person about A or B? They say, well, we're afraid that it'll be misunderstood, and so they back away. And so there are many things that just go unaddressed, right? And
Yeah.
yeah,
But Brenda, that's such an interesting comment that you just made, because there are two things about that I'd like to share, if I may. One of them is that is exactly what happens, is that in this avoiding of people who look different,
Mhm.
first of all, the problems don't get addressed, they don't get resolved. And furthermore, the people who would like to, the person who looks like me who would like to get the support or help never feels supported or like they get what they need to get. And just last week, I was in a meeting and someone was talking about this with me, a man who is a leader. He was saying, it's awkward. I don't know what to say. And I said to him two things. First of all, people of color, people who are from the groups that we might be thinking about when we think about this whole issue, they don't need different leadership. You don't need to learn any new leadership skills. You just need to use the same skills that you use with everybody else and just stop avoiding using them with us. So that was one of the things that is really important for us to get across when we're talking to leaders, because I know leaders can do this. How do I know they can do this? They do it already. What is missing is that they don't apply the same rules. I had somebody on a webinar once say, I have 2 Black women in my team and I just don't know how to lead them. And I said, somebody has sold you a bag of bad goods, because frankly, when they told you this, what they've taught you is to run away from us. Like we're something so special and unique, like you have to treat us differently. And what we really yearn for is for you to recognize our humanity being exactly the same as everybody else's.
Humanity,
That's
absolutely.
it.
And so in Access Denied, I refer to this as veiled discriminators. And the reason is because these are the things that people will never address with you. They won't talk with you about, but they'll hold against you in some cases, right? So you're under this veil or this indictment, and you don't even know what's happening, right? All of the conversations are behind closed doors. And in other cases, I'll say, these are the kinds of things that become mentoring discussions, or that are discussed during outings or happy hours and things like that.
Yeah, because there's the research that comes out of Coqual that clearly says that and also from Lean In, what was really missing for people who aren't part of the majority group is usually they don't get the feedback that they need so that they can do better if they need to do better. And also, sometimes they don't get the acknowledgement of their successes when they have just, exhibited this strong performance. And all of that means that the person is being stifled because you don't get to see all the how you don't get the reflection of the fact that you're doing well. And then when you do something wrong or you could do better, nobody tells you that you could do it better. And then that's used against you. So I totally understand the language that you used, that you use in your book, and why you would describe it in that fashion. And it also has a really strong emotional component to it because you're sitting there all the time just wanting to excel. That's all you want. You just want the same thing. You want to do the best, but you're missing information, you're missing support and leadership, and you have to kind of make it up as you go along, and you might make a few wrong turns in that process.
Right, right. And what shows up for me when I hear you say that is that unfortunately everyone doesn't see this higher level of inclusion, diversity as a win-win. It's perceived as, any credit for me is perceived as a debit for someone else, which
Right.
is unfortunate. But
Yes.
when you talk, you said something a few minutes that really took me straight to page 88, everyone. When you said, what is your personal connection to inclusion and diversity? Which is such a powerful and important question. And you want to say, why does it matter to you personally? Because at the core, this is really about hearts and minds.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
it's so important to understand what a person's individual or personal commitment is to this.
Yeah. Yeah, that was another one of those epiphanies where one of the things I was trying to do with this book, I say it's not a how-to book. You can get some how-to books that might tell you use this tactic, use that tactic, and they're really written for what people who say that they're, who are diversity and inclusion professionals, and that's their focus, and that's totally appropriate. But I call my book a how-to-be book because this book is really about mindset and emotion, right? Because it's you have to really step back and do a little bit of soul searching in order to get the point of this book. Because what I'm basically saying is it will be difficult for you to lead an organization if you don't have some sense of what is the experiences of 100% of the people in that organization, not only within the walls of your company but also in their overall lives. And you probably have that understanding of a portion of your population already, the portion that looks like you. But for the portion that doesn't look like you might not really have a clue what that experience is, either inside or outside. And so the question is, why is this important to you? Not for financial reasons. There's a lot of data that shows the benefits of diversity, and I'm not even going to touch that because, as I say in the book, enough already with that. We figured that out. The question is, what is it that you personally believe, and what is it that you feel you can do to contribute to being a part of the solution with regard to this challenge? And so I have certainly seen that it is an emotional barrier that is holding people back. And that's why it is hard for some leaders to articulate what they want the company to do about this issue. But the leader should be able to say, this is what we are going to do. This is our vision and our strategy, and here's why. And the why has to be a personal why. The why has to be that I have really, for example, the why is unique, but an example of a personal why is that, I have come to really understand the experiences of employees that I had not previously understood. And it is really important for me that every employee in this company believes that he or she can show up and do their best and be supported in the company. When I realized that that was not happening, it is my personal commitment that I would like 12 months from now that any employee that I meet in any situation, or any employee who is talking about this company in any other situation, would say, you know what? I'm having a better experience because now we have a leadership from the top that's saying, I will not tolerate anything but the best treatment for every single employee in this company.
Without sounding overly cynical, I agree with everything that you're saying. But the question for me is, what do we do when that's not the sentiment, right?
Mhm.
What do we do when a person really does not embrace that value or that belief? And
Sure.
it really is more transactional. It's about, uh, bottom line revenue and shareholder value and external benefits of diversity.
Yeah. So there are two aspects to that question, Brenda. The first one is I don't necessarily expect everybody to believe it, nor do I think that will realistically happen. But even if you do not believe it, the other part of this message, of course, is that this is a leadership obligation. This is not a moral obligation or a financial obligation. It's a leadership obligation. So if you say you're running this enterprise and these are the people in it, or these are the people you want to be in it, then you're not an effective leader if you're not effective at leading 100% of the people who are in the enterprise.
Yeah.
So that's how I think about this. So you can, I don't, in fact, even if you don't come along on the journey of trying to understand, you have to put your personal beliefs, your politics, and whatever else you might bring to the situation aside, because you do have this obligation, and it's a leadership obligation, and you can't shirk it. So you must do this, even if there's something in your personal, swirling around in your heart that says that you shouldn't. You still have to do it because you're here to lead everybody, not just a portion.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm the CEO, and I buy in all the way, and I'm there, with my values and my beliefs and my mandate, my manifesto. What if I have senior leaders, senior executives
Yeah.
on my team, that don't buy in? How do I
Yeah.
hold them accountable?
Yeah. Well, that's a common problem. In fact, I would wager that a big part of the reason why progress on so called diversity and inclusion, which I call ready, why the progress tends to be slow or sometimes 2 steps forward and 3 steps back is because there are executives and organizations that don't believe in this, and either they don't implement the ideas that are requested by the CEO of the board, or they slow walk them, or they do one thing out of the 10 things, or they don't cascade the messaging effectively on purpose. I mean, they just show through their body language, then their nonverbal communications, that they think this is all nonsense and they don't want to have anything to do with it. I see that all the time. So here's where I go back to the whole idea that I think of this only from a leadership lens. I don't think of it from any other lens.
Hmm.
And a leader who is not who a leader has to set the vision and strategy so that they can then say what they expect their colleagues to do. And only after they have done that can they actually hold them accountable for doing it. So that's another reason why this all has to come from the top, because if you don't set the strategy, the vision and the strategy with some clear ideas about what you're trying to accomplish, you can't hold those people accountable even if you wanted to. So this is a leadership challenge. You've got to set the accountability, and then you cannot let it slide. You have to come back in 4 months or 3 months and say, what have you done? You have to come back in 6 months. What have you done? Come back in 9 months. What have you done? Come back in a year. What have you done? And the reason I said every quarter is because I already know that if you just say, I'll do this once a year, it's too long.
Yeah.
You've got to do this as an you need to be doing at least once a quarter check-ins, but you really need to make this a part of everything that you talk about in every meeting with your executive team, and they need to do a similar thing all the way through the organization.
Absolutely. It's got to show up everywhere. It's got to be part
Yes.
of the fabric of the organization, reviews and check-ins and everything. And so in Access Denied, I really focus a lot on self-advocacy, and I encourage people to speak up and really, call things out in a respectful
Right.
and constructive way, right?
Mhm.
And those are messages that are not always well received. But what I hear you saying basically is, from the top down, there's got to be a space held, as we say in coaching. We have to hold a space for those conversations and those inquiries to
That's right.
take place and to be welcomed. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to the behavioral expectation that you have to set for leaders, for
Mhm.
managers, because my manager is my point of contact. I may never know the people in the C-suite, but I have a manager. So at the manager level, they have to know what is acceptable or expected, as well as what is unacceptable. And I think about the experiences that I have had where, for example, I wanted feedback from a manager. I wanted to hear about, what are my promotion opportunities or development opportunities, and the manager would not engage me in that. This is
Yeah.
something I experienced, especially earlier on in my career, and I
Mhm.
didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't know. There certainly wasn't any space in the environment in that particular situation I'm thinking about. There wasn't any space for me to go to that manager and just tell them point blank, because it was just not going to happen. So I had to kind of
Right.
hold that in and just go off to the side and figure this all out on my own. So a counter to that would be an organization that says, if you're going to manage a group of people, you're going to develop a group of people, right? That's an obligation. And we never want to have anybody on this team come to HR or anywhere else and say they're not getting feedback, they're not getting developmental support or access to the opportunities. So you've got to sort of build this whole thing into the way that all of the behavioral expectations for your managers, and it is just not, it is just not optional. On the other side of this, so the side that you just brought up in terms of self advocacy, you have to figure out how to initiate difficult conversations when you need to. So, for
Right.
example, I have this little script that I always have rolling around in my head that basically said, um, can I have a few minutes of your time to share something with you? And you set a time and you go in and you say, I know you probably didn't realize this, but when you did X, here's the effect it had on me or on the team or on my interactions with the team or what have you. And you state your case very respectfully. You have your facts straight, you've prepped for this. So I just wanted to share with you, just, you probably didn't realize it, but when you did X, here's what happened. Now, when you do that, a person has two ways that they can react. They can say, oh my gosh, I don't know what you're talking about, right? They could get defensive. Most people, on the other hand, would say, I had no idea. I had no idea I had that impact. And they'll ask you for more information. And then that gives you a clue that you can start a little dance with them where you can explain to them. And even then, they still might not get it on the first try. But at least you have a little opening. The second kind of person is the one that gets very, defensive and says, I have no idea what you're talking about. And, you're just making a mountain of a molehill, right? Something like that. And with that kind of person, you also have an opportunity, because what you have to remember is you've been processing this for a longer time than they have.
Yeah.
Either they don't know that they did it and they're not thinking about it, or they know that they did it and they don't care that they did it. Either way, they're not really prepared for a conversation about it. So when the person gets defensive, I think that's your clue that you have got to now be very careful in thinking through what you want to do next. And what I recommend in those situations is to assume the person needs time to process this information, because putting them on the spot usually doesn't work. And so I recommend, you saying something like, I know that this is not something that you've had a chance to think about, but would you mind if we put 30 minutes on the calendar to talk about this next week? Do you have time on Tuesday or Wednesday? And offer them the opportunity to get the follow-up conversation on the calendar, because you don't want to let it go, but you want to make sure they think about this, because you want this to work out. You're not trying to, your goal is not to get them to feel bad. Your goal is to get to the result that you want, which is to make progress on your goal. So you give them that time. Hopefully they will agree to put the time on the calendar. You speak with them next Tuesday, and then you go from there, because you still don't know. And it might take a little time. But the reason I recommend giving them that extra time, rather than just blurting everything out in one overwhelming, throwing all the water of the bucket at once,
Right.
is that even though they might have done something that wasn't effective, you want to always have the emotional advantage in the situation. So in doing this, you're like managing that situation, but it also lets them feel like they have some space to negotiate. Now, the other person, the one that says, I had no idea, and then you tell them what you have to say, usually that person would say, a couple of things they would say. They'd say, I didn't mean that. I certainly didn't mean that. And I would love to make sure that I don't do that again. Or like, I find ways to help you, because I think what you're telling me is that didn't feel like I was being supportive of you. They'll usually engage in a dance, and then that lets you know how to handle that person. You can kind of calm down, breathe out. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that there is no one answer. There's no one approach. But I do say there's only really one approach. That is, when you want to have to start a difficult conversation, you have to have your plan already figured out. You have to give the person some grace, because even though you very much might not want to in that moment, that's what's going to get you with that respect going both ways, and then, to a positive outcome.
Absolutely. And what I take from that is either way, whatever response you get, it's important for you to know who the person is and
Yes.
where they stand, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And for you to keep control of the situation, so that, because after all, even though it will be very emotional, you can get another job. There is a tomorrow. Don't put every one of your emotions, and don't put all the chips on the table in that one conversation. You have more to lose. You want to manage that.
Absolutely. And, one of the things I talk about is setting realistic expectations. And so if it's a person that I cannot ever expect to support me and to engage with me in a meaningful conversation about my career and my future and things like that, then I know where I stand. Right. And a lot of
That's right.
times we position ourselves, we end up in park, if you will,
Mhm.
waiting for that to happen, and it's just never going to be there. And so
Yeah, it may never happen. So you do have, this comes back to this idea, Brenda, that for each of us, as much as we will find ourselves in situations sometimes that can be very challenging, we always have to know what our own vision and strategy is for ourselves,
absolutely.
what our North Star is.
Yeah.
Because other than that, you'll get pushed from left to right, up and down. And at the end of it, you don't even know how you got there. You kind of, and this is not something that anyone told me when I was starting my career. It is something that I figured out over time, but it is also something that I tell anybody that I talk to, especially in this environment. What do you want? What
Right.
do you want? Yeah,
Right.
have that real clear.
And you have to make a choice, I think, about whether your career is something that's going to just happen to you,
Right.
based on what other people allow to happen, or will support or not support, or whether it's something that you're going to take control of and
Yeah.
drive. So,
You're absolutely right, Brenda. And I hope that anybody who's listening to this conversation notices something, which is that the stuff that Brenda and I are talking about applies in every single leadership situation.
yeah.
I know that, but my book is primarily focused on issues having to do with race, ethnicity, and gender, and I explain in the book why that is. But this is actually true in any situation, because anybody could have a leader who doesn't do these things, and anybody could have a leader who they need to approach with a difficult topic, and they need to figure out how to handle that. And I always say, when you're going into a difficult situation, apart from the fact that you need to know what you need to get out of it, you need to also I think of it as like a what is that game? Bowling, like a bowling ball, a big heavy bowling ball that you currently have in your hands. Your goal is to take that bowling ball, move it out of your lap, and put it in the other person's lap if they are your leader, because that's their job. And you should leave these conversations feeling a little bit better each time. And if you don't, and a little bit lighter, if instead the ball feels like it got bigger or it hasn't changed, that's a clue. And you notice at the gut level, that's the clue. And then you have to figure out, well, what do you want for you? What do you want for yourself?
Absolutely. And we cannot continue to justify and explain it away and all of those things, and
Mhm.
just accept it for what it is.
Yeah.
So, if there are three key takeaways from your book, and certainly from this conversation, what would they be?
Yeah. So the the book it is a manifesto in a way, and it does basically say, I don't think we're going to make the progress on the ready stuff at the pace that we need to make it, where we will see meaningful differences in terms of representation or how people feel or whatever, until it's led from the top of the organization. And leading it from the top of the organization might sound really complicated, but if you listen to what I'm actually saying, it should not sound that complicated, because what it is just taking the same skills that you use when you implement a new product, when you decide that you're going to do a new marketing strategy, or any of the other things you do when you run a business. And instead of treating this as a separate issue over there, you bring it into the core and you make it part of the way you run this business. So, and again, I know that I'm simplifying this, but my point is to say, use the skills you already know how to use to get big things done, and apply them to this particular thing. So that would be one. I think another is that, this respect thing, as you can see, has a manifestation on both sides of the equation. I show up in a situation, the thing that I want most is to be respected. So another thing I would have as a takeaway is, that respect is actually something that any person and any organization can provide, and that it is a mandatory thing. So think about, does your organization create respect for everybody who shows up or not? And make sure you know the answer to that question. So that would be my second takeaway. And I guess the third one would be that, Brenda, you call it creating a space. In coaching, we call it that. I think leaders have to really spend a few minutes to think about, well, what are the spaces like in our organization, or do they even exist, where people have the opportunity to say what's on their minds and then to think they're going to get support to make it better, rather than be rejected or dismissed, when they do that.
Yeah, yeah. And if I may just add a little something to that, because you said something that really got my attention with regard to our individual responsibility. Think of the skills that we utilize to conduct business to achieve all of these amazing results that we achieve for our employers and for our, in some cases, shareholders, right? And, how much of that are we applying to our own circumstances? I spoke at a conference a few weeks ago, and I asked how many people in the room had participated in strategic planning activities for their
Yeah.
employers. And everyone in the room, more than 100 people, raised their hand. I said, how many of you have done any strategic planning for yourselves?
That's right.
One or two people raised their hands.
Right.
So we have an obligation to really be stewards of our own circumstances.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I so believe in that. I have been on I've been on a mission for the last couple of years, a very specific mission, because I had a strategy and a goal that I wanted to accomplish at the end of those 2 years. And people who met me know at the end of the 2 years say, "How did you do that?" And I say, "Oh, I did this 2 years ago. I actually did this 2 years ago," meaning I put the stake in the ground 2 years ago. I didn't put the stake in the ground today. But if I didn't put the stake in the ground 2 years ago and say, "This is what I want," there's absolutely no way I would have it 2 years later. And that goes for everything that we do. We have to know what we want, and then we have to create the circumstances to get what we want.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I think that leading inclusion, regardless of where you sit, is a meaningful tool that will help everyone to take those necessary steps. I'm so glad that we had the time to talk about this today, and I hope this will be the first of many conversations to dive deeper into this concept.
Well, Brenda, it's been a pleasure. This is not going to be the last conversation, because having met you and learned about the way that you think and about your work and about your book, I'm just really excited for us to partner, because, we talk about the very same issues. We come at them from slightly different angles, which is actually a really good thing, because when you put it all together, I think it really helps to make these issues clearer and helps people who want to, to be more inclusive leaders, or who want to build healthy organizational cultures. It gives them a lot of rich information to work with, both of us.
No, I agree. So thank you for that. And there's so much more to come, and I'm excited about it. So
Yes.
thank you for what you've brought forward, and for all I've learned from you. This has been amazing. And for everyone who's listening, this is just such a beautiful product. It really is. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Brenda.
All right. We'll talk again soon.
Absolutely.